Today I'm sitting with Dr. Lynn Sacco, an associate professor of history at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Lynn was one of the first ever faculty advisors for SEAT, Sexual Empowerment and Awareness at Tennessee, and she is going to share some of her experiences with us today. So Lynn, could you tell us a little bit about your background prior to coming to the University of Tennessee?
I came to the University of Tennessee in 2004 when I got an offer to become an assistant professor in the Department of History. My fields are gender, sexuality, and race, so I began offering courses immediately, such as history of gender and sexuality. Through those classes, students started to talk about issues that they had a lot of questions about because I discovered that they lacked sexual education in Tennessee, that by law, most students in Tennessee took a course called abstinence rather than a more traditional sex ed that might be about the birds and the bees. I was quite surprised, and I started asking students what abstinence class consisted of. What was the curriculum? And mostly they just said it was just don't say no. A number of questions came up because Dr. Bill Frist was the senator then. HIV/AIDS education and prevention was a major political issue, and it turned out that the Bush administration had hired political appointees, not anybody with a science, medicine, or health background, to edit reports by the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, about the ways to prevent transmission of HIV/AIDS, and particularly the Bush administration took the position that condoms are completely ineffective to prevent transmission. That statement is not only not supported by science, but the exact opposite is true. But the reason the Bush administration took that position is because he was evangelical and appealing to the Christian right, who feel that it is wrong to have sexual relations outside of the marital bed, and felt that teaching about sexuality and contraception might encourage young people to become sexually active. Anything that might facilitate guilt-free extramarital sex is wrong. So students started sending me emails with what I thought were reproductive 101 questions. I also discovered that every spring, dozens of evangelical or conservative, religiously conservative students were marrying immediately after graduation, and they planned on starting a family. They had really very little sexual education whatsoever. And I wondered how you could grow up in a culture that coded sexuality as dangerous and wrong and a source of disease, and then suddenly on your honeymoon think and experience it differently. So I had been teaching in all of this. In addition, I'm a lesbian. I had heard the anti-gay rhetoric in Tennessee from the time I got here, and it was quite uncomfortable to hear that. I found many LGBT people on campus to be closeted and afraid. Students also talked to me about the complexity of their own family lives. Many students had a father who was a stay-at-home dad, but they also recognized that socially he took grief for that. Students who had siblings who were unmarried, who had babies, and not only babies, but often biracial babies because they had partners of color. These were all white students, conservative students, often from rural parts of Tennessee. They really had very little access to information, but students didn't know what to make of this. In 2009, I became chair of the LGBT Commission. What happened after that was that Brianna and Jacob sent me an email one day, and they said they were interviewing faculty who they thought might be good advisors for a new group they were organizing, SEAT, and they're going to put on Sex Week. What they said was they wanted to have an event that was, number one, sex positive, number two, driven by student questions and concerns. So what they meant by sex positive is they didn't want an event where we just talked about all the bad things that can happen if you have sex. They wanted to hear instead how sex might be a pleasurable thing, how it might be positive. They were not interested in learning about particular practices and techniques. What they wanted to do was to sort of make a balance from the nonstop negativity. The second part of it was student driven. What they do is they do surveys of students and ask them what issues are important to them. So this is not decided by faculty, it's not decided by organizers. They ultimately edit all this, but it is student driven. The last factor they wanted, and goes with the positivity, is they didn't want this to be a series of, quote, dull lectures. What they wanted it to be was entertaining and fun because, as Jacob and Brianna had pointed out, this is extracurricular. Students don't have to go, and there's so many negative associations with abstinence class. They wanted to make this an inviting, fun event. And I should also add right here that the point of Sex Week is not to encourage students to have sex. It does not have a view, but it wants to present views that maybe students have heard about but don't know about and could be addressed in a fun manner. 99% of pastors in America would die and go to heaven if they heard these talks. These talks are often Biology 101. How does a man achieve an erection? Biologically, how does that work? Okay, the first time I saw this, I thought, uh-oh, there's like 300 people in this room, a Sunday night. You could have heard a pin drop. Nobody giggled, no one laughed. It was quite obvious the students were very intent and wanted this information. The speaker was then going to talk about safe sex, though. She didn't just say, you have an erection, goody. The speakers then stop and say, now, if you have an erection, you need to stop and think, does the person in front of me want my penis? And they start to talk about consent. They start to talk about conversation. They start to talk about not making assumptions. It's actually extremely healthy. Another speaker whose talk was labeled hookup culture talked about how to have conversations with people before you have sex to make sure you have an agreement. And then he asked the students to practice it. And I thought, oh, they won't bother. After 10 minutes, he could hardly get them to stop, but he gave them a list of like 5 questions to talk about with potential sex partners. Now that can be interpreted as he's encouraging people to have promiscuous sex. But here's what he said next. He said, after that conversation, if the person is not interested in whatever you're interested in, it's over. You don't force yourself. He also said, many of you are new to sex in college. Many of you are also new to drugs and to alcohol. If you are new to sex, drugs, and alcohol, you cannot do all 3 at the same time. If you cannot have sex without using drugs or alcohol, you have a problem, and you need to talk to somebody. So much of the content of Sex Week is quite different than what it's purported to be. Now, the first year, here's a great example. They've done a play every year that's free that's somehow related to sexuality, and it's kind of a kickoff ahead of time, a little way to advertise Sex Week. We come out of the first play, all of a sudden everybody's cell phones go off. Now, this is before Sex Week has even started. It is the media, it is parents, it is administrators, and what happened was somebody had been at the play, had then immediately sent something to CPAC saying that UT students were planning a sex week and that they were having events that they literally made up. They said there was going to be a lesbian bondage demonstration, for instance, which was not happening at all. One of the presenters on her website also has interests in lesbian bondage. We were bringing her here to talk about writing romantic poetry. That was never discussed. Instead, it was this purported lesbian bonding demonstration. At that point, it would be safe to say all hell broke loose. The chancellor told me later that he was up basically the entire night hearing people screaming at him on the telephone, why is UT permitting this? This is disgusting. Unfortunately, UT's official response was to throw the students under the bus, and I have to say that's been the response every year. This is how the idea of Sex Week became a political tool. It has been a great way for the state legislature. Every year, they come back and want to punish the university. If you look at the law they passed where they took away the funding for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, it talks about Sex Week, not the Pride Center. And the legislators have said they will not be happy until this event is gone because they believe it is encouraging sex. It is a waste of taxpayer money. Now, there is no taxpayer money that goes into this. But what has happened is that legislators made the university agree to have an opt-out on student fees. So student fees are protected, the events are protected by First Amendment. So whether we have Sarah Palin or Hillary Clinton come, it doesn't matter. Any sort of views are protected under First Amendment for student-sponsored events. So since the university could not censor the students by prohibiting Sex Week, the legislators then said we can't let student fees, parents don't want their student fee to go to this. So this very cumbersome system got made up so then parents could opt out and their student fee would be reduced by say $5, whatever the amount is. That was a way to reduce funding for Sex Week, and I think the legislators thought it would be more effective than it has been. It has not prevented any student from coming to it or attending a Sex Week event, however. Most events are free. Some events are high profile and have a fee, and anyone can pay it. These events are also open to the public. The years I've been here, I've heard almost nothing negative from students about Sex Week. Their biggest complaint might be a session wasn't as fun as they thought it might be. I've never seen students criticize each other during a Sex Week event. It seems to be, to use that word, a safe space where students feel they can say different things and they're sharing. It's not about judging. There's an event every year on abstinence for those who wish to remain abstinent until married. I think it's a very strained interpretation to view Sex Week as encouraging promiscuity or it's going to turn kids gay. That's actually literally an ignorant thing to say because it misunderstands how sexuality works. I guess people could be upset because they could see it as condoning or advocating, for instance, transgender people. But again, many students here just want a space where they can learn in an academic setting. Sex Week is the place, and this is how it's marketed itself and why I think it's become so important, where students can come and talk about issues, questions, concerns, ideas, without someone saying, you can't think that, you can't feel it, and gives them that space simply to process. I have found the same thing true. This is my 13th year here, and teaching these courses about sexuality and gender. I have never had a student complain about me. I have deeply conservative and religious students take these courses regularly. No one is asked to believe anything. All we do is examine historically. So for instance, the abortion book, it's like, why has abortion always been a big issue in America? And why do women have abortions? Why is this an issue? There is nothing to do in the class with your grade, with the oral discussion about whether you think Roe versus Wade should be repealed or whether you're pro-life or pro-abortion makes no difference. It's really looking about women in the past and thinking about why some issues seem to us that they never go away. I find that if you don't tell students, like, I'm here to make you support abortion, that's not my job. I'm not here to advocate. I'm not paid by Planned Parenthood. I'm paid by the university to educate people, and I tell students I don't care what their views are. I just care that they can think to reach a view that they can defend, that they don't just say, well, that's just how I feel, that's not what college educated means. So the courses are a way for them to then explore these views outside of any doctrinal or political or religious agenda. They can take away whatever they want from it.
I'm wondering, when Jacob and Brianna brought this idea to you, did you suspect that it was going to become such an incendiary topic for the legislature? Did you expect this kind of controversy that we've seen?
I knew that it was reasonable to expect there would be criticism from the name Sex Week. And that's why we made the rounds ahead of time and made it clear that students weren't trying to poke the university in the eye. It actually was with the idea of big ideas and top 25. It was saying, let's act more like an Ivy. Our students deserve what Ivy universities have to offer. What I didn't expect was for the university not to prepare for it. They claimed they were stunned and surprised. I thought that was quite naive. It is also apparently the policy now that we just wait every year and hope the legislature doesn't take any negative action. So every year now, Sex Week is like a piñata for political purposes.
Why do you think that Sex Week became such a subject of controversy?
It's very easy in the current culture war to suggest that liberal professors are not honoring the values of Tennessee. Now, I have been interviewed about this. I have listened and watched other people's interviews, and I have to say that the regular, generally white male, older political pundits in Knoxville and East Tennessee are united against Sex Week. They believe it is a frolic, inappropriate to the university. But I have to say, honestly, when I watch their interviews, and if you read their writing, they're smirking about it the whole time. And what they actually say is, well, when I was at UT in the 70s, we didn't need a sex week to learn about sex. It's actually very gross and disgusting. It's puerile. I see the same thing from the legislators. I would say it's fair to characterize them as obsessed with Sex Week. They're obsessed with it. They have blown it all out of proportion. I would suggest look and see the pregnancy rates of UT students versus rates of students in their own districts and see who's doing a better job. I think that the part that's been overlooked is how UT throws students under the bus. I think that's unethical. It's wrong. Our students were even threatened. I was at a meeting and the lawyer for the university had printouts of the obscenity laws in Knoxville, and told me to instruct Jacob and Brianna that if they went ahead with Sex Week, they would be arrested. The following year, the legislature issued a condemnation of Jacob and Brianna personally. I think it's outrageous that the university let this happen. For instance, UT never called them out on putting out misinformation such as this fake lesbian bondage demonstration, never called them out on that. The very first year, the legislature said it would not approve the entire UT system budget if Sex Week continued. My advice to the chancellor was call their bluff. It was the governor's first year. He was the education governor, and it would have made UT look completely ridiculous. Once they let that happen, it gets kicked. We get kicked every year, and I expect it to happen still. And every year I hear, just like I hear now with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, well, we just hope the legislature will be in a better mood next year. I see no reason to believe that. I've had many meetings with Chancellor Cheek and many members of his cabinet over the years. And I also had one-on-one meetings with the chancellor when I was the chair of the LGBT Commission. I do not hold Chancellor Cheek solely responsible for any of this. He sees the larger issues. I see these issues as a bigger problem that UT always seems subservient to the legislature, which should not be a value of higher education. I'm glad this story will be told. I'm glad that people are cooperating to give almost a real-time version of this history. It'll be very interesting to see what someone writes about it 50 years from now.